The wind swept hard across the dusty plains of Redstone. Crossing the morning, the auction bell rang, its iron clank echoing across the weather-beaten storefronts. Like a warning from some old forgotten god, folks gathered in restless circles, whispering about the sheriff's decision to permit a family sale, a practice outlawed in most respectable towns but quietly tolerated in places where desperation pressed closer than decency. At the center of it all stood Clara McKinley, her dress torn at the sleeves, her hair tied back in a trembling knot, and her 3 children pressed against her skirt like frightened quails seeking cover. Clara had been a respected seamstress once, married to a kind ranch hand who died under the hooves of a panicked herd. The debt collectors came first for the house, then for the mule, then for the tools she used to sew. When nothing was left to take, they came for the only remaining assets her late husband's creditor had the power to claim, the very people who depended on her. Under the crooked roof of Redstone's ramshackle livery barn, the auctioneer's voice barked, numbers with the cold rhythm of a butcher tallying cuts of meat. The children, Samuel, aged 10, Ruthie only 6, and baby Thomas, stood shivering though the air was warm, their eyes fixed on the ground. Clara whispered soothing words to each of them, promising that everything would be all right, though even she struggled to believe it. To the side of the crowd stood a tall cowboy in a dust-stained hat, arms crossed, jaw locked tight. His name was Colter Hayes, a man known for speaking little but seeing much, a rancher who had carved his living out of stubborn land and harder winters. He had ridden into town only for nails and a new saddle strap. But the sight of that frightened woman and her children stirred something deep, something he thought he had buried with the memory of his own mother who once faced a similar humiliation in a mining town far away. Colter's fists clenched as the bidding began. $5 for the boy, 3 for the girl, 1 for the baby, 10 for the mother, the auctioneer barked. The crowd murmured, but no one bid at first. Even those desperate for labor hesitated at the idea of taking children who would need feeding before they ever offered work. Clara kept her head bowed, but her hands tightened around Samuel's shoulders, ready to resist any attempt to peel her children away. The sheriff shot her a warning look, resting his hand on the revolver at his hip. Just as the auctioneer prepared to split the family into separate lots, Colter stepped forward, his boots thudding with quiet purpose. A hush fell across the barn as he looked up at the auction stand with a steady gaze. "I'll take 'em," he said, voice low but carrying, strong enough to still the murmurs. Clara's breath caught. Even the auctioneer faltered. "All of 'em?" the man asked, disbelief dripping from each word. "Mother and 3 kids?" Colter nodded once. "All of 'em." Some snickered, thinking he'd gone mad. Others whispered in admiration. Clara stared at him, eyes wide, unsure whether to fear him or thank him. Colter reached into his coat and tossed a leather pouch onto the table, silver coins clattering loud enough to announce that he wasn't making some empty gesture. "That should cover whatever debt you think they—" The sheriff stepped forward as if to protest, but the weight of Colter's gaze reminded him that there were some men you didn't pick fights with unless you were prepared to dig your own grave. Clara, trembling, took a hesitant step forward, her arms wrapping protectively around her children. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to plead, perhaps to warn him that she had nothing left to give, but Colter shook his head gently. "Ma'am," he said softly, "no one's taken your kids from you. Not while I can stand." For the first time in months, Clara felt air fill her lungs completely. Around them the crowd dispersed, grumbling, gossiping, shocked by what they had witnessed. Colter turned toward the door and glanced back at the family. "Come on," he said, tipping his hat. "You're with me now. You're safe." And though Clara could hardly believe it, though every instinct told her that miracles didn't happen to people like her, she gathered her children, took a trembling breath, and followed the stranger who had stepped between her family and ruin, hoping that whatever future waited beyond the dusty barn doors was kinder than the past she was leaving behind. The road to Colter Hayes' ranch stretched across sweeping, golden plains where buffaloes
Clara
rose
in
a cruelty that most men would have walked past without blinking. Colter wasn't a talkative man. He kept his eyes on the horizon, his posture relaxed but watchful, like someone who had lived too long under the weight of responsibility. Clara studied him cautiously, noticing the quiet patience with which he answered Samuel's curious questions. The gentle nod he gave, Ruthie when she shyly showed him a pebble she'd kept in her pocket, and the unexpected tenderness with which he checked the wagon wheels during rest stops to ensure the children wouldn't be jostled. Part of her feared that the kindness was temporary, that eventually he would want something in exchange, but his silence held no hidden demands, only a steady calm she hadn't felt since her husband's days. When they arrived at the ranch, a sprawling spread of weather-worn cabins, sturdy fences and open pasture, Colter helped the children down and gestured toward a small house near the main barn. "This'll be yours," he said simply. Clara blinked, unsure she heard him correctly. "Ours?" she whispered. "Mr. Hayes, we got nothing to offer you. I can work, I can sew, I can clean, but I can't pay you back for what you did." Colter removed his hat, rubbed the back of his neck and sighed. "I didn't do it to get paid back." For a long moment, he seemed to search for the right words. "When I was small, folks tried to sell my mother after my father died. A stranger stepped in, saved her life, saved mine. I never forgot it. Figured it was time I passed the blessing along." Clara stared at him, the weight of his confession sinking deep. Her eyes filled with tears, not the hopeless kind, but the kind that come when a heart too long crushed by hardship suddenly tastes kindness without condition. Over the weeks that followed, life slowly stitched itself back into a shape that felt almost whole. Samuel learned ranch work from Colter, following him like a shadow across the fields. Ruthie blossomed, laughing again as she helped feed chickens and chase butterflies across the yard. Baby Thomas learned to walk on the porch planks, giggling whenever Colter scooped him up with a smile he tried and failed to hide. As for Clara, she spent her days mending harnesses, sewing clothes, tending the garden, and at night she found herself standing on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills, feeling something she feared she'd never feel again: hope. But one night trouble returned. The creditor who once owned Clara's debts rode into the valley with 6 armed men, claiming Colter had stolen property. Colter stepped out alone, rifle in hand, but his voice steady as stone. "They ain't property," he said, "and I paid every cent you asked for." The creditor spat, accusing him of interfering with business. Before Clara could panic, the townsfolk, people whom Colter had helped over the years, appeared behind him, forming a quiet, immovable wall. The creditor realized he'd misjudged the land and the man who stood before him. With curses swallowed by fear, he and his men backed off, galloping away into the darkness. Clara ran to Colter, trembling, overcome with gratitude. He simply nodded and said, "Told you. You're safe." As seasons changed, the little house on the ranch filled with warmth, children's laughter, shared meals, quiet evenings watching stars blink awake, and somewhere between mended fences and rescued chances, Clara found herself looking at Colter with a softness she didn't expect. One evening, as Samuel practiced roping nearby and Ruthie braided wildflowers into her hair, Clara stepped close to Colter on the porch. "You didn't just save us," she said gently. "You gave us a life again." Colter glanced at her, the sunset casting gold across his features. "Maybe," he murmured. "But truth is, you all saved me too." Their hands brushed, soft, hesitant, hopeful. And as the warm breeze carried the scent of prairie blossoms across the ranch, the story, born from despair, shaped by courage, lifted by kindness, became the beginning of something more than survival. Something like destiny. Something like home. And for anyone listening, anyone watching, anyone stumbling through their own storms, Clara's voice closes the tale with a whisper. If you believe in second chances, in standing up when life breaks you down, then stay with us. Subscribe to the channel. There are more stories to tell, stories of hope, of grit, of the people who rose from dust to build a new world on the American frontier.